What if a midnight fire was set to erase centuries of English legacy, and only one woman dared the flames to salvage a future? The night air was so dry it felt electric, every blade of grass sharp, the very soil thirsting for rain that hadn't come in months. Hawthorn Grange lay sprawled beneath a honey moon, the ancient stones of the manor glowing faintly against the velvet sky. Lady Imogen Fairweather, alone in her small cottage at the edge of the estate, sat awake, haunted by dreams that never truly ended. She'd been a hero once, the sort of woman the city cheered. Now she let the countryside stillness be her only witness. A low crackle broke the silence, barely noticeable above the tick of the old clock. At first, she thought it was her imagination, her mind conjuring phantom emergencies in the deep hours. But then another sound, a muffled roar, distant but growing, the unmistakable thrum of fire. Imogen shot upright, her heart leaping, body primed by years of training that never left her muscles. She pressed her palm against the window. Orange flickered against the barn walls, turning the night to a living nightmare. No time to think. She pulled on boots, grabbed her flashlight, and bolted into the darkness. The scent of smoke hit her first, a cruel echo of that day in London. Sirens, shouts, lives lost. Her breath quickened. She forced it steady. Hawthorn Grange wasn't just land and buildings. It was legacy, her family's, and the sanctuary's. It was home to dozens of rescued horses, and, most of all, to Duchess, the rare Cleveland Bay mare who had survived so much, only to be haunted by grief. As she neared the paddocks, chaos greeted her, flames leaping along the dry grass, devouring the old rose hedges that lined the east side of the stable. Volunteers and a handful of villagers ran back and forth, some filming on their phones, others shouting warnings. Sir Julian Redgrave, the estate's graying trustee, barked orders, waving his arms helplessly. In the confusion, a few horses had already been led out to the field, their eyes wide, flanks trembling. But Imogen scanned for only one, Duchess. She spotted Agnes Heathcote, the sturdy stable manager, hauling open a gate with a crowbar. "Duchess is still inside," Agnes gasped, voice ragged. Imogen nodded. "I'll get her." Julian caught her arm. "Imogen, it's too dangerous. Don't be sentimental." She shook free. "I know what I'm doing." The stable's interior was a hell of falling ash, choking heat, and panic. Duchess stood at the far end, wild-eyed, nostrils flaring, refusing to move. Imogen crouched, her voice low and steady. "Come on, girl. We've done this before, haven't we?" But Duchess wasn't listening, her mind locked in terror, memories of her lost foal swirling with the acrid smoke. Imogen crawled forward, ducking beneath a half-collapsed beam. Sparks fell onto her arms, burning through her sleeve. She barely noticed, her focus only on Duchess. Outside, the crowd had grown, phones raised, faces illuminated by firelight. Imogen ignored them. She reached Duchess, pressed her forehead against the mare's trembling neck, and began to hum, a tune from years ago, soft and familiar. For a moment, nothing. Then Duchess shifted, her breathing slowing. Imogen slid a halter over the mare's head, whispering, "One step at a time." A thunderous crash split the air, the rear wall caving in, sending flames billowing down the aisle. Duchess panicked, kicking, almost crushing Imogen against the stall. Imogen gritted her teeth, refusing to let go. She tugged gently, guiding Duchess backward, dodging falling debris. Smoke stung her eyes, but she kept moving, inch by inch, every sense tuned to the rhythm of the mare's heart. Behind them, Sir Julian's voice rang out, desperate. "Imogen, for God's sake, get out!" But she and Duchess moved as one, finally bursting through the stable doors into the cool, smoky night. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others shouting, flashes popping as phones captured the moment. Imogen stumbled, coughing, one arm draped protectively over Duchess's neck. Julian rushed forward, his expression torn between relief and exasperation. "You could have died," he muttered. Imogen met his gaze, unflinching. So could she. It wasn't over. The fire department arrived at last, sirens piercing the countryside calm. Imogen stepped back as the professionals took charge. The stable was lost, but the sanctuary's heart had survived. Or had it? Duchess trembled, refusing food or water, eyes fixed on the distant ashes where her foal had died. Imogen felt the ache inside her chest, the familiar weight of failure and the cost of courage. In the hours before dawn, as the last embers faded, Councillor Damien Crawley appeared, his car gliding up the lane, headlights slicing through the mist. He offered Julian a handshake, his smile sharp as glass. "Such a tragedy," Crawley intoned, voice oily. "These old places, so difficult to insure, so dangerous. We'll have to discuss the future of Hawthorn Grange, won't we?" Imogen watched him, a chill prickling her skin. She knew as surely as she'd known the flames would come, that the battle for Hawthorn Grange had only just begun. The world was upside down in the days that followed the fire. For Lady Imogen Fairweather, every hour seemed to move in slow motion, as if time itself was scorched by the flames that had ravaged Hawthorn Grange. News vans crowded the long drive by sunrise, churning up dust and gossip, their antennas poking the gray sky. The old oaks that shaded the sanctuary now stood sentinel over scorched earth, their leaves dusted with soot. Imogen had barely slept, replaying the rescue over and over. She could still feel the rough halter rope in her burned palms, Duchess's frantic heartbeat under her hands, the roar of flames in her ears. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the mare's haunted gaze, the empty stall where her foal should have been. On the morning after, Imogen found herself in the middle of a media circus. The fire, caught on cell phones and streamed live, had made her a reluctant sensation. Reporters jostled for her attention, their microphones thrust forward, hungry for sound bites. "Lady Imogen, what was going through your mind when you ran into the burning stable? Was it worth risking your life for a horse? Do you think Hawthorn Grange should be rebuilt or replaced?" Imogen kept her answers brief, eyes shielded by sunglasses, voice tight with exhaustion. She didn't want to be a hero, she just wanted the sanctuary to survive. Behind the scenes, the aftermath was far less glamorous. The main barn was reduced to a blackened skeleton, and the insurance was nowhere near enough to cover a rebuild. The volunteers cleaned up in silence, their movements stiff, grief and shock hovering in the smoky air. Agnes Heathcote barked orders, but her eyes were red and swollen. Even Sir Julian Redgrave seemed diminished, his crisp suit smeared with ash, his hands trembling as he signed paperwork and dealt with emergency contractors. But the most pressing worry was Duchess. The mare stood apart from the others, isolated at the far edge of the paddock, staring at nothing. She ignored fresh hay and gentle words, flinched at every sudden sound. Imogen spent hours at her side, murmuring softly, letting the mare sniff her palms. Once, Duchess pressed her head into Imogen's chest and let out a long, shuddering breath. Imogen stood still, tears blurring her vision, holding on to hope with every fiber of her being. Meanwhile, word spread quickly through the village and surrounding counties. Social media exploded with the story, videos, hashtags, digital petitions to save Hawthorn Grange. Supporters and detractors weighed in. Some praised Imogen's bravery, calling her a guardian angel. Others accused her of recklessness, blaming sentimentality for endangering human life. Among the critics, Councillor Damien Crawley stood tallest. At the next emergency council meeting, he spoke gravely about liability and public endangerment, using Imogen's actions as evidence of the estate's mismanagement. If it weren't for Lady Fairweather's impulsiveness, this could have ended in tragedy for more than just the horses, he declared. Is it responsible to pour public money into a property that endangers both people and animals? He proposed suspending the sanctuary's municipal funding until a full review could be conducted. Julian, already stretched thin by insurance denials and private debts, felt the walls closing in. But not everyone was so quick to side with Crawley. Local children made handmade cards and tied ribbons to the sanctuary gate. Elderly villagers who remembered when Hawthorn Grange hosted May Day dances and summer fetes delivered home-baked bread and hot tea to the volunteers. Even Agnes, stoic as stone, started leaving the barn lights on all night, whispering that lost souls sometimes needed a beacon. For Imogen, each day was a test of patience and resolve. She found herself fielding phone calls from animal welfare officials, skeptical donors, and news outlets looking for the next angle. She tried to keep things normal, feeding horses, patching fences, tending to Duchess. But the pressure was relentless. One night, while she was making rounds with a flashlight, Imogen overheard a tense conversation by the tool shed. "They'll shut us down for sure, Julian. We can't pay for another audit, let alone rebuild the stables." "It's not her fault, Agnes, but Crawley's got the council eating out of his hand. I don't see a way out." "We can't give up. The horses." Imogen stepped into the light. "Then we don't. We fight. I'll do interviews, launch a fundraiser, whatever it takes." Julian looked at her, tired but grateful. "Imogen, the world's watching. Be careful." Outside, Duchess paced the fence line, moonlight glinting off her black coat. Imogen leaned on the gate and watched the mare, silent, stoic, stubborn. She thought of the fire, of Crawley's cold calculation, of the hundreds of years that lived in the stones beneath her feet. She realized then that this fight wasn't just about one horse or even one estate. It was about memory, about the duty to defend what mattered, even if the world called you a fool. The next morning, Imogen met with a local journalist, her story set against the smoldering ruins. She refused to play the victim, instead speaking fiercely about compassion, history, and second chances. "Some things are worth saving, even if it breaks your heart," she said, "even if it costs you everything." As the interview ended, Imogen spotted Crawley across the courtyard, his eyes narrowed, calculating. He was already plotting his next move, threatening lawsuits, dangling the prospect of selling off the sanctuary's land. Imogen knew she would have to be braver than ever, not just for Duchess, but for everyone who called Hawthorn Grange home. And somewhere in the dusk, as Imogen leaned by the paddock, Duchess took a step closer, just one. Imogen smiled, the fire's scars aching, but hope flickering anew. The battle had truly begun. Dawn over Hawthorn Grange brought only uneasy calm. The world felt oddly muted after the chaos of fire and rescue. Soot still dusted the dew-soaked paddocks, and the once vibrant roses along the fence hung their blackened heads. Imogen woke to silence, a strange hush that filled the rooms of her cottage and crept into the farthest corners of her thoughts. The headlines, the frantic calls, the fundraising promises, these faded for a moment as the sun struggled through a haze of smoke and heartbreak. She made her morning tea, hands lingering on the chipped porcelain. On the other side of the frosted window, the horses grazed in the mist. All except one. Duchess haunted the edge of the pasture, a solitary shape by the crumbled dovecote, unmoving as a statue. It was as if she believed the world itself had ended, or perhaps she was waiting for something, someone, that would never return. Imogen slipped on her boots and made her way down the gravel path, the silence broken only by the soft crunch underfoot and distant birdsong. Agnes Heathcote met her at the paddock gate, thermos in hand, worry lining her face. "She hasn't touched her feed, not since yesterday," Agnes said, voice low. "Barely a drop of water. I tried the apples, even the mince." Imogen nodded. "I'll stay with her for a while. Maybe she just needs time. Agnes reached out, squeezed Imogen's shoulder. We all grieve, some aloud, some in silence. Don't take it too hard. Imogen let herself into the pasture, careful to move slowly. Duchess's ears flicked, muscles tensing, but she did not bolt. Imogen lowered herself onto the grass at a respectful distance, her presence as unobtrusive as possible. She pulled a worn book of poetry from her jacket, a habit she'd developed during long, lonely nights in the city, a way to anchor herself when the world seemed too much. She read aloud, her voice carrying softly across the cool morning air. Dylan Thomas, Audre Lorde, gentle rhythms and quiet power. The words were not for Duchess, not exactly, but for the space between them, a bridge over the gulf of pain and memory. The mare's eyes, once wild with terror, now seemed dull, withdrawn. Imogen watched her carefully. Each twitch, each flicker of movement was a clue. There was a shadow in Duchess's gaze, a heaviness that lingered even in the safe light of day. The loss of her foal during the fire was a wound that no salve could heal, a ghost that prowled the sanctuary with her. Days slipped by in this quiet way. Imogen spent her mornings and evenings near Duchess, reading, writing, sometimes simply sitting in silence. Volunteers came and went, cleaning debris, fixing fences, whispering updates about the council and the insurance. The main barn, now a charred skeleton, was cordoned off, a stark reminder that safety could never be taken for granted again. Rumors about Duchess rippled through the local horse-mad elite. Some said she was ruined and should be put down, that she was a danger to herself and others. Others whispered that her lineage was too rare to lose, that she must be bred again at any cost. Imogen ignored it all, focusing only on the living, breathing animal before her, the rhythm of her slow breaths and the twitch of her ears. On one rainy afternoon, a minibus pulled up the long drive. Imogen recognized it at once. It was the foster children from the nearby town, brought to Hawthorn for a bit of fresh air and respite. Their laughter rang through the damp air as they splashed through puddles, marveling at the horses and the muddy fields. Agnes herded them into the visitor barn, her usual gruffness softened by the presence of so much hope. Imogen invited a small group to sit with her by Duchess's stall. "Just be gentle, don't crowd her," she instructed, handing out brushes and sliced apples. The children approached, cautious and wide-eyed, their voices dropping to whispers. One girl, no older than 7, extended a tiny palm with a single apple slice. Duchess hesitated, her nostrils quivering. For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the mare stretched her neck and accepted the offering, her lips brushing the girl's fingers. A hush fell over the group. Imogen's heart ached. Was this progress or just a flicker? The children brushed Duchess's coat, their movements awkward but earnest, and for the first time since the fire, the mare's muscles seemed to relax. When the rain let up, the children were ushered back to the minibus, waving their goodbyes. Imogen lingered by Duchess, hope stirring beneath the grief. That night, she returned to the stall with her poetry, reading by the light of a lantern. Duchess stood closer now, her eyes less clouded, her breathing deeper, as if some small barrier had been breached. Still, each evening brought new anxieties. The council's threats loomed large, the risk of closure never far from anyone's mind. Sir Julian struggled with phone calls, donors, and sleepless nights. Agnes patrolled the paddocks, checking every latch, her loyalty unwavering but her worry growing. The sanctuary's future hung in the balance, as fragile as the bond Imogen was trying to rebuild. Imogen refused to give in to despair. She filled the silence with stories, kindness, and patience, holding on to the hope that Duchess, and maybe Hawthorn Grange itself, could find a way out of the shadows. In her heart, she believed in the healing power of small gestures, of steady presence, of letting pain breathe until it softened. As the days shortened and the air cooled, Imogen sat under the old oaks, watching Duchess graze at last, still wary but less alone. The scars were not gone, but the world was not finished with them yet. Evenings at Hawthorn Grange slipped into a kind of fragile rhythm. Each day was anchored by simple rituals: the measured scoop of oats, the slow circuit of paddock checks, the rustle of the evening newspaper on Sir Julian's porch. But beneath the surface, everything felt tentative, as if the world was waiting to see if it could trust itself again. For Imogen, this meant finding meaning in small victories, each one like a thread weaving together the frayed tapestry of her own heart. She took to spending her evenings near Duchess's stall, a thermos of tea in hand, a well-worn poetry book tucked beneath her arm. Sometimes Agnes would join her, dropping by with news of a newly mended fence or to trade a half-hearted joke about the village gossip. But often it was just Imogen, reading softly into the dusk, her words rising above the breath of the horses and the gentle creak of old timber. It was during these evenings that Duchess began to change. The mare, so withdrawn since the fire, started to edge closer to the stall door whenever Imogen entered. She would listen as Imogen recited poems, her eyes following the rhythm of every stanza. Dylan Thomas for courage, Audre Lorde for hope. Imogen watched the mare's ears flick at the sound of her voice, a tiny sign that trust, once shattered, could still be coaxed back to life. On a stormy Wednesday, the sanctuary hosted a group of foster children again, the minibus trailing puddles as it pulled up the drive. Agnes grumbled about muddy boots, but her face softened as the children tumbled into the barn, faces flushed with excitement. The rain kept everyone indoors, so Imogen decided to set up a quiet circle of chairs in the corner of the stable. She handed out storybooks and brushes, and for a while the air was filled with soft laughter and the whisper of little hands at work. Imogen guided the children as they approached Duchess. "She's shy," she explained, "but sometimes, if you're patient, she'll come say hello." The children watched, wide-eyed, as Imogen demonstrated how to hold out a brush, how to let Duchess come to them. After a few tense minutes, the mare took a step forward, sniffing a small boy's outstretched hand before lowering her head to accept a gentle stroke. A hush settled over the group, a moment as fragile as glass. Imogen blinked back tears. She saw in Duchess's tentative movements a reflection of her own journey, the fear, the hope, the cautious return to trust. After the children left, Imogen found herself lingering at the sanctuary long after dark. She poured herself another cup of tea and sat with Duchess, reading aloud, letting her voice fill the silence. The mare seemed to settle, her muscles loosening, her breaths deep and even. For the first time since the fire, Imogen let herself imagine a future, a real one, not a memory haunted by loss. But the outside world refused to stay quiet for long. The next day brought a fresh round of rumors and speculation. Hawthorn Grange had become the talk of every village cafe and riding club in North Oxfordshire. Some whispered that the sanctuary was cursed, doomed to fail after the fire. Others insisted that Imogen's sentimentality was the real problem, that she was clinging to a past that couldn't be saved. Julian, increasingly frustrated, spent hours in his office arguing with council officials and anxious donors. The pressure weighed on him, and he began to lose patience with Imogen's gentle approach. "You're wasting your time reading poems to a horse," he snapped one evening. "We need action, not poetry." Imogen held her ground. "It's not just about Duchess, it's about what this place means, to the kids, to the community, to all of us. If we give up on her, what's left?" Agnes sided with Imogen, but the strain on the sanctuary was clear. Bills piled up, and every day brought a new complication: a leaking roof, a sick foal, another council form demanding signatures and documentation. Imogen found herself pulled in every direction. Advocate, caretaker, public face, and, above all, silent companion to a traumatized horse. One night, with rain drumming on the roof, Imogen stayed late watching over Duchess. She brought a sliced apple and offered it slowly, her movements unhurried. The mare hesitated, then, with a shuddering breath, took the apple from Imogen's palm. It wasn't just food, it was a gesture of trust, small but profound. Imogen smiled through the ache in her chest. Later, as she locked up the barn, Imogen saw Agnes standing by the door, her expression gentle. "She's coming back to us," Agnes murmured. "Maybe we are a little." Imogen nodded, swallowing the knot in her throat. At home, Imogen reflected on these quiet victories. She thought about the power of patience, of being present through the worst storms. Trust, she realized, was a garden that grew in the silent spaces, watered by kindness, tended by time. Duchess was not healed, not yet, but the first green shoots of hope had appeared, and that, for tonight, was enough. By the second week after the fire, the fragile peace at Hawthorn Grange felt more like the uneasy stillness before a storm. Lady Imogen Fairweather sensed it with every careful step across the yard, an electricity in the air, as if the whole estate was bracing itself for a new blow. Whispers of financial trouble drifted from Julian's office, and rumors of redevelopment flickered among the volunteers like shadows cast by uncertain candlelight. The threat became real one bright morning when a glossy black SUV rolled up the gravel drive, scattering chickens and sending the horses in the main field into a restless dance. Out stepped Rupert Thatch, a man whose reputation for swallowing up English countryside in exchange for concrete was the stuff of local legend. He was tall, tanned, and wore a suit more suited to a London boardroom than the muddy Cotswolds. Next to him walked a woman with cold blue eyes and a clipboard, her heels sinking into the soft grass. Julian rushed to greet them, tension etched deep into his brow. "Rupert, I wasn't expecting you so soon." "Couldn't stay away, Julian. I heard about the fire. Tragic, really." Rupert's smile never reached his eyes. He swept his gaze over the half-rebuilt stable, the scorched grass, and finally to Imogen, who was watching from the gate, hands clenched tight. Imogen kept her distance as Julian led Rupert and his assistant on a tour. Their voices drifted over the paddocks. "The insurance won't cover the full cost, you say?" "No, not even close. And the council's threatening to pull our funding." "Well, I'd hate to see this place fall apart, Julian. I could make an offer. Develop a few luxury homes on the edge. Think of the revenue, the jobs." Rupert's assistant scribbled notes, her eyes flicking up at every mention of liability and unruly horses. When they reached Duchess's paddock, Rupert paused, watching the jet-black mare pacing the fence. "That one's a beauty," he mused. "But the trauma... Horses like that rarely recover, do they? Too much of a liability for a public sanctuary. But she'd make a fine hunt mount, perhaps. If you'd consider selling her separately, I have buyers waiting, private collectors, sporting men, the usual sort." Imogen stepped forward, unable to keep silent. "Duchess isn't for sale. None of the horses are. They're not trophies, they're survivors." Rupert gave her a polite, patronizing nod. "Very noble, but nobility doesn't pay the bills." Later, back in the main office, Imogen confronted Julian. "You can't be considering this." Julian rubbed his temples, looking years older. "We're out of options, Imogen. If we lose the council funding, we can't even pay Agnes, let alone feed the horses through winter. Thatch is offering to clear our debts. He says we could keep a small sanctuary on the north field. It's either compromise or close our doors for good." Imogen's anger flared. "You'd sell out everything Hawthorn Grange stands for? Everything your family built?" Julian slammed a hand on the desk, voice shaking. "What choice do I have? Sentimentality won't save this place." The conversation ended in bitter silence.
Outside, volunteers tried to keep up morale, but word of Thatch's visit spread fast. Some feared for their jobs. Others fretted about the future of the horses, especially Duchess. Even Agnes seemed shaken, her usual stoicism wavering.
Developers don't care about animals, Imogen. They'll turn this place into a playground for the rich, and the rest of us will be out on our ears, she muttered as they mucked out stalls together. That afternoon, Thatch and his entourage returned, paperwork in hand. Imogen found herself cornered near the tack room by the woman with the clipboard, who pressed forward with a fake smile. "Lady Fairweather, I'm sure you understand the realities. If you could just sign these preliminary agreements, only for review purposes, it would help expedite a smooth transition." Imogen didn't even glance at the documents. "You'll get nothing from me but resistance." The woman's smile tightened. "It's going to happen, with or without your cooperation. Best to get ahead of it for everyone's sake." Outside, Julian called for a staff meeting by the crumbling dovecote. He announced, with visible discomfort, that he was exploring all avenues for the estate's future, including potential partnerships with local developers. Rupert stood by his side, projecting confidence and charm for the assembled staff. "We're all about preserving the spirit of this place," he said, spinning empty words. "But it's time to look to the future. Sentiment is fine, but it can't keep the lights on." For Imogen, the meeting was a gut punch. She saw the worry in the volunteers' faces, heard the anger and despair in whispered conversations. The sanctuary, once a haven, now felt like a battleground. Duchess sensed the tension, growing more agitated by the day, snorting, shying from anyone but Imogen, pacing until her hooves tore up the grass. That night, as rain lashed the windows, Imogen sat by Duchess's stall, reading softly, her voice trembling. The mare pressed close, their shared fear and uncertainty binding them together. Imogen resolved, then and there, that she would not let Hawthorn Grange or Duchess be sold to the highest bidder. She would fight, even if she had to stand alone. As thunder echoed across the hills, Imogen made a silent promise to the sanctuary and every lost soul it sheltered. No matter what happened, she would not surrender. Not to Crawley, not to Thatch, not to anyone who saw animals and history as nothing more than numbers on a page. The clouds broke over Hawthorn Grange, washing the charred fields in silvery rain and leaving the air sharp with the scent of wet earth. Yet the storm brewing inside the sanctuary was fiercer than anything the weather could conjure. Word had spread that Julian, under crushing financial pressure, had agreed to send several of the sanctuary's horses, including Duchess, to the upcoming village auction. He insisted it was only a last resort, a way to keep the sanctuary alive for a few more months, but Imogen saw the truth. It was a desperate act, born from fear and exhaustion. On the morning of the auction, Imogen barely recognized the sanctuary. Volunteers moved like ghosts, keeping their heads down, refusing to meet her eyes. Agnes was grim and silent, her loyalty now tinged with bitterness. Duchess paced anxiously in her stall, as if sensing what was coming. Imogen spent the dawn with her, brushing her glossy black coat, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "We'll find a way out, girl," she said, stroking the white star on Duchess's forehead. The mare pressed her head into Imogen's shoulder, breathing in time with her. For a moment, Imogen closed her eyes and let herself believe in miracles. But reality crashed in as the trucks arrived. Rupert Thatch's men strode across the yard, laughing and making crude jokes about sentimental old ladies and spoiled horses. Julian tried to remain dignified, but his voice shook as he gave orders. Imogen watched, helpless, as Duchess was loaded onto a trailer, her eyes wild with fear. The village auction was held in a muddy field behind the pub, the air thick with the smell of livestock and diesel fuel.
A makeshift tent flapped in the wind, sheltering a motley crowd of dealers, collectors, and a handful of villagers. Thatch was there, surrounded by his entourage, all in expensive coats and mud-splattered boots. Crawley stood nearby, smug and satisfied, his hands clasped behind his back as if he were already counting the profits. When Imogen arrived, the crowd quieted. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with barely concealed scorn. The auctioneer, a red-faced man with a booming voice, welcomed everyone and launched into his routine, his words mechanical, indifferent. Lot after lot went by. Ponies, donkeys, a few old carriage horses. Imogen barely heard the numbers. Her eyes never left Duchess, who stood at the edge of the ring, shivering and restless, a stark figure against the straw and mud. When Duchess's number was called, a hush fell. Imogen stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. "I object. This horse is not for sale. She's under sanctuary protection." Rupert Thatch laughed loudly, cutting through the tension. "Protection? More like a prison for damaged goods. If you won't let her be useful, at least let her go to someone who knows her value." Murmurs ran through the crowd. The auctioneer glanced at Julian, uncertain. Julian hesitated, then nodded. Let the sale proceed. A cold fury rose in Imogen's chest. She watched as the bidding began, first slowly, then faster, with Thatch's men pushing up the price, jeering at anyone who hesitated. Imogen, determined not to give in, countered every bid, her voice steady even as her heart raced. She spent every last pound she could scrape together, but the price soared out of reach. Duchess, frightened by the shouting and the thudding of boots, suddenly reared, snapping her halter. The crowd gasped as she broke free, crashing through the flimsy ring and bolting across the rain-swept field. Imogen didn't hesitate. She vaulted the barrier, calling out to Duchess, ignoring the mud, the jeers, the shouts of the auctioneer and Thatch's men. The chase was chaos. Duchess plunged through puddles, slipping and sliding, her muscles taut with panic. Imogen ran after her, heart pounding, rain soaking through her jacket. Spectators laughed and wagered on her failure, but she kept going, calling Duchess's name over and over. Finally, Duchess disappeared into a thicket at the edge of the woods, the trees swallowing her whole. Imogen followed, ducking branches, stumbling over roots, until the noise of the auction faded behind her. The forest was dark and dripping, every sound magnified by fear and adrenaline. Imogen pushed deeper into the woods, calling softly now, her breath ragged. "Come on, Duchess, it's okay, I'm here." A flash of black through the trees, a glimpse of Duchess, trembling, sides heaving. Imogen approached slowly, hands open, voice low. "Easy, girl. I know you're scared, but I'm not leaving you." For a long moment they stood in the shadows, the only sounds the patter of rain and the thunder of Imogen's heartbeat. Bit by bit, Duchess's breathing slowed. She allowed Imogen to stroke her neck, to slip a lead rope over her head. Back at the auction, chaos reigned. Thatch raged, demanding compensation for lost property. Julian argued with officials. Agnes tried to hold off a handful of reporters who sensed a story in the drama. But Imogen ignored all of it. She led Duchess into the heart of the woods, away from the noise, the deals, the people who saw her only as a commodity. As twilight fell, Imogen built a small shelter from branches and her raincoat, huddling close to Duchess for warmth. She whispered promises, her voice fierce and determined. "No one is going to take you, not while I'm still standing. We'll figure it out together." And there, beneath the ancient yew trees, with the storm raging outside and the world pressing in, Imogen found a strange sense of peace. Whatever came next, lawsuits, debt, even ruin, she knew she'd made the right choice. For the first time since the fire, she felt truly alive. Imogen barely slept as the night deepened in the woods. She huddled beneath the thick boughs, arms around Duchess, rain dripping from the leaves above. Her phone was dead, the battery long since drained by frantic calls and useless attempts to get a signal. All she had was the warmth of the frightened horse beside her and the certainty that she could not go back to the auction, could not hand Duchess over to those who saw her only as a burden or a prize.
As dawn crept through the branches, cold and silver, Imogen rose stiffly, feeling every ache from the chase. Duchess was dozing, one ear always tilted back toward the trail they had come. The woods felt ancient, alive with the shiver of birds and the distant rumble of the highway. Imogen brushed mud from her jeans and looked around, piecing together her next steps. The storm had left the forest floor slick, the air heavy and fresh. She knew they couldn't stay hidden forever, but she also knew that something in Duchess had shifted, some kernel of trust forged in panic and shared desperation. "Come on, girl," she murmured, stroking the mare's neck. "Let's see where this takes us." They moved deeper into the trees, Imogen keeping to deer paths, stepping quietly, letting Duchess set the pace. Hours slipped by, the world shrinking to the rhythm of footsteps and the hiss of wind through the branches. At times, Imogen spoke softly, stories, lines of poetry, old memories she'd never dared to share out loud. Duchess listened, occasionally nudging Imogen's shoulder, her eyes less wild now, her movements steadier. Mid-morning, Imogen stopped at a narrow stream, letting Duchess drink and graze on the mossy bank. She watched the horse carefully, noting how she kept glancing toward a stand of dense hawthorn and holly ahead. There was something about the way Duchess sniffed the air, her body tense and alert, not fear exactly, but recognition. Imogen followed her gaze and saw a flash of movement, small and hesitant, deeper in the brush. At first, she thought it was a deer, but as she peered closer, she caught the outline of a tiny, skeletal colt, its coat patchy, ribs showing, mane tangled and caked with mud. The foal watched them warily, half hiding behind a fallen tree. For a moment, Imogen's breath caught. She remembered every story Agnes had told about foals abandoned on the edge of farmland, victims of neglect or the wild dance of survival. Her heart ached for Duchess, who had lost her own baby in the fire. Now, fate seemed to place another in their path, as if offering a chance for healing, or maybe redemption. Slowly, she knelt, making herself small, murmuring comfort. Duchess stood between her and the colt, ears pricked, nostrils flaring. The colt took a tentative step, then another, wobbling and uncertain. Duchess whickered softly, a sound Imogen had not heard in weeks. The foal paused, head high, then stumbled forward, coming to rest by Duchess's flank. For a long time, none of them moved. Imogen watched the silent exchange, the mare's gentle nuzzling, the foal's hesitant trust. She felt a raw hope growing in her chest, fragile and dangerous. Here, in the hidden woods, Duchess had found something to love again, a tiny creature as lost as she was. Imogen fashioned a rough shelter from fallen branches, lining it with leaves. She fed the colt what little she had, apples from her pocket, a handful of grain. As the day wore on, she dared to check the colt for injuries. It was weak, dehydrated, but its eyes were bright and full of stubborn life. Imogen named it Aspen, after the trembling leaves above their heads. Rain returned by dusk, and Imogen crouched beneath her makeshift roof, pressed between two horses who needed her as much as she needed them. She whispered to Aspen, stroked Duchess's mane, and told stories of London, of rescue, of Hawthorn Grange's old celebrations and dances under the stars. As night fell, she felt something shift inside her, a sense of purpose, of connection. Duchess was changed too. She watched over Aspen, standing guard, her posture less defensive, more maternal. The mare who once flinched from every touch now allowed Imogen to sit at her side, their little trio huddled against the darkness. The next morning brought a new challenge. The woods were no longer a sanctuary, but a test. Imogen knew that she couldn't hide forever.
Food would run out. Julian and the others would be searching. So would Thatch's men, and perhaps even the council, who would see headlines in every lost horse and runaway heiress. Still, she wasn't ready to leave. She wanted Aspen stronger, wanted Duchess's trust to root deeper. She spent 2 more days in the clearing, building up the colt's strength, watching the bond between mare and foal blossom. Each morning, Imogen scouted for food and water, shooing away curious hikers and keeping her own presence as secret as possible. One night, as fog crept over the ground, Imogen heard voices in the distance, shouting, calling her name. The search parties had arrived. She wrapped her arms around Duchess and Aspen, torn between relief and dread. But something in her heart had changed. She was no longer running out of fear. She was returning with hope, with a second chance for all of them. With the first pale light, Imogen gathered her strength, packed up their tiny camp, and led Duchess and Aspen out of the woods, toward Hawthorn Grange, toward whatever reckoning waited, and toward a future she was finally willing to fight for, not just for herself, but for the broken and the lost she'd come to love. The path back to Hawthorn Grange was muddy and tangled, but Imogen didn't hesitate. Aspen, still shaky but stronger, stayed close to Duchess, and Duchess, transformed by a fierce maternal instinct, seemed to guide them all through the thicket and fog. Imogen held on to Aspen's thin lead, her other hand resting on Duchess's withers, feeling the nervous tremor of both horses, but also their surprising resilience. The world was still misty gray as they reached the edge of the estate, dew shimmering on the tall grass.
A distant commotion floated on the morning air. Imogen glimpsed flickers of color, umbrellas, camera flashes, villagers clustered at the end of the drive. Her heart pounded. It wasn't just the staff and volunteers waiting. Word of her disappearance had spread, and with it, the story of the runaway mare and the lost foal found. News vans were parked askew along the lane, journalists jostling for the best angle. Crawley and Thatch's men hovered at the margins, their faces tense and guarded. Imogen paused behind a stand of hawthorn, composing herself, brushing dirt from her jacket and twigs from her hair. Aspen nuzzled her arm, a tiny nicker of uncertainty. Imogen smiled. Despite the spectacle waiting, she was not alone. She glanced at Duchess, who seemed taller somehow, her black coat gleaming even after days in the wild. They stepped into the open. A hush swept through the crowd. Cameras snapped. Whispers grew into a roar. First surprise, then excitement, then a swelling, spontaneous cheer. Even the most cynical villagers were swept up by the sight. Lady Imogen, mud-streaked and unbowed, returning home with 2 horses instead of 1. Agnes broke through the circle first, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You did it, Imogen! You did it! She's back! And who's this little one?" Imogen laughed, her own eyes bright. "Meet Aspen. He's going to need a lot of care, but Duchess, she's already stepped up." She stroked the mare's neck, and Duchess stood tall, ears forward, as if she understood that this was her moment. The media surged, questions flying. Did you plan to rescue another horse? What does this mean for the sanctuary? Are you now the symbol of Hawthorn's resilience? Imogen deflected as gently as she could, keeping the focus on the animals and the community. This is about giving them a home, not about me. Hawthorn Grange isn't just stone and fields, it's every second chance we can offer. Julian, flustered and red-eyed, pushed forward through the reporters. He stopped short at the sight of Aspen. His defenses crumbled. He was no longer the estate's embattled trustee, but a man watching a miracle unfold. Imogen saw the struggle in his eyes, the old pride and new hope wrestling inside him. Imogen, I can't believe it. You found her, and a foal." She squeezed his hand. "I didn't find them. We found each other. But Julian, you have to see, this place matters more than any quick profit or developer's promise." The tension broke like a storm. The crowd's energy turned abruptly against Thatch.
The developer stepped forward, desperate to regain control, voice sharp with scorn. This emotional display doesn't change the facts. The sanctuary is insolvent. Sentiment can't pay wages or fix roofs. But the villagers, fired up by Imogen's ordeal, weren't having it. A woman from the riding club called out, "You think any of us want to see this place bulldozed for your condos? You'll ruin what makes this village special."
Others chimed in, their voices swelling. "Keep Hawthorn alive! Animals first, money second!" The news crews caught it all, beaming the confrontation to screens across Oxfordshire. Crawley tried to pivot, smoothing his tone for the cameras. "We all want what's best for the community, but responsible management must come first." Imogen stepped forward, her mud-streaked boots planted, voice unwavering. "Responsibility is doing what's right, not just what's easy. We stand for compassion today and every day." The crowd erupted in applause. Thatch, realizing his position was untenable, turned away, barking orders to his assistant. His business prospects, once so assured, crumbled under the weight of public outrage. As the commotion died down, Julian put a trembling arm around Imogen's shoulders. "You were right, about all of it. I lost sight of what mattered, but not anymore. Hawthorn Grange stays whole and open, I promise." Agnes, nearby, wiped her eyes, her voice thick with relief. "Welcome home, Duchess. And welcome, little Aspen. You've brought the whole world back to us." That evening, the sanctuary was alive with energy. Villagers arrived with hot casseroles and baskets of apples. Donations poured in, some digital, some in crumpled bills pressed into Imogen's palm. Volunteers patched fences, children made welcome banners for Aspen, and the horses grazed peacefully under the setting sun. Imogen found a quiet moment by the paddock, Aspen dozing at Duchess's feet. She looked up at the ancient oaks, feeling the exhaustion in her bones and the glow of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, real and undiluted. She knew there were still obstacles ahead, financial hurdles, council votes, long nights. But for now, Hawthorn Grange had weathered the worst. And Imogen had discovered that, sometimes, the greatest rescue was not saving others, but allowing herself to be changed and saved in return. As dusk settled, a gentle breeze rippled the grass. Agnes joined her, silent for a long moment, then said, "You never stopped believing, did you?" Imogen smiled, arm around her friend's shoulders. Someone had to. And in the fading light, with laughter drifting from the barns and new beginnings in the air, it finally felt, for all of them, like coming home. The days that followed Imogen's return shimmered with an energy Hawthorn Grange hadn't seen in years. It was as if the ordeal had burned away not just the old stables, but also the apathy and doubt that had haunted the estate for so long. The villagers who had once whispered about closure now showed up daily, rolling up their sleeves, wielding paintbrushes, hammers, and fresh ideas. Imogen, at the heart of it all, felt the weight of responsibility give way to a kind of determined joy. As dusk settled, a gentle breeze rippled the grass. Agnes joined her, silent for a long moment, then said, "You never stopped believing, did you?" Imogen smiled, arm around her friend's shoulders. Someone had to. And in the fading light, with laughter drifting from the barns and new beginnings in the air, it finally felt, for all of them, like coming home. The days that followed Imogen's return shimmered with an energy Hawthorn Grange hadn't seen in years. It was as if the ordeal had burned away not just the old stables, but also the apathy and doubt that had haunted the estate for so long. The villagers who had once whispered about closure now showed up daily, rolling up their sleeves, wielding paintbrushes, hammers, and fresh ideas. Imogen, at the heart of it all, felt the weight of responsibility give way to a kind of determined joy. She poured herself into the work of rebuilding, not just fences and barns, but the very purpose of the sanctuary. With Julian's full-throated support and Agnes's steadfast wisdom, Hawthorn Grange launched a new program, welcoming not only neglected horses, but also children from foster homes, war veterans, and anyone in need of a safe place. News of their story spread far beyond Oxfordshire, attracting volunteers, donations, and attention from national charities. Imogen worked long days and longer nights, but the exhaustion felt different now. It was the ache of fulfillment, not futility. Each morning, she found Duchess and Aspen grazing by the oak trees. Duchess now the picture of maternal calm. The black mare who once flinched at every sound now led the herd, her confidence restored. Aspen, still a bit awkward on his spindly legs, had become the darling of every visitor, nuzzling hands and sneaking apples when Agnes pretended not to notice. There were setbacks, of course. Money was still tight, and some nights Imogen lay awake calculating how to stretch every donation. Bureaucracy was relentless. Crawley, shamed but not defeated, continued to throw up red tape wherever he could. But the village had found its voice, and whenever a new obstacle appeared, the people of North Oxfordshire rallied around the sanctuary with petitions, bake sales, and even a fundraising festival on the village green. Through it all, Imogen and Julian found themselves growing closer, not just as stewards of the land, but as partners in hope. One rainy afternoon, after a long meeting with new benefactors, Julian invited Imogen to walk the boundary of the estate. The fields glistened, and the air was sweet with the scent of clover. "I never thought I'd see Hawthorn like this again," Julian admitted, hands clasped behind his back, voice soft. "You've given me something I lost a long time ago, belief. In the land, in the animals, in myself." Imogen smiled, nudging him with her shoulder. "We did it together, but it's not just about us, Julian. It's about making room for everyone who needs this place, horses and humans alike." He nodded. The tension that had marked his face for so long finally softened. "I was wrong to doubt you, and I'm sorry for siding with Thatch, even for a moment. I was scared. I let pride blind me." Imogen stopped, turning to face him fully. "You did what you thought you had to do. We all make mistakes when we're afraid of losing everything. Forgiveness is part of moving forward." The words hung in the air, carried by the wind through the hedgerows. Julian smiled, a little crookedly, and reached for her hand. For the first time, there was no barrier between them. No old titles, no inherited grievances, just the shared hope for a better future. Back at the sanctuary, Agnes stood by the paddock watching Aspen race in wild circles, Duchess close behind. Her usual sternness gave way to an almost childlike delight as the foal tripped and rolled, bouncing back up, unbroken by past hardships. When Imogen joined her, Agnes wiped her eyes on her sleeve. "I always knew Duchess had it in her," she said, her voice rough but warm. "But I never expected her to become the heart of this place. Or you, Imogen." Imogen laughed, her hand squeezing Agnes's. "I think we all needed a second chance, even me." The changes at Hawthorn Grange rippled outward. The sanctuary's social media exploded with stories: rescued horses, smiling children, muddy volunteers dancing at sunset. A local artist painted a mural of Duchess and Aspen, soon joined by portraits of the other sanctuary animals. Letters and packages arrived daily, many from strangers who had watched Imogen's story on the news, inspired to donate or even visit. One day, a woman and her teenage son arrived, nervous but hopeful. The boy barely spoke, hiding behind his mother. Imogen greeted them with her usual warmth, inviting them to meet Duchess and Aspen. By the end of the afternoon, the boy was leading Aspen around the paddock, his laughter ringing clear. "Thank you," the mother whispered as they left. "This is the first time I've seen him smile in months." Moments like that kept Imogen going when doubts crept in. She wrote thank you notes at midnight, organized feed deliveries before dawn, and stayed up late planning new activities for the children and volunteers.
Every day brought fresh challenges, but also new opportunities for kindness, connection, and growth. Even Sir Julian, once stiff and distant, embraced the change. He took charge of grant applications, welcomed visitors with a smile, and learned the names of every child who came through the gate. When he and Imogen unveiled a new sign at the entrance, Hawthorn Grange Sanctuary, a haven for all, the entire village turned out to celebrate. That evening, as the sun sat over the paddocks and the oaks cast long, golden shadows, Imogen stood with Julian and Agnes sipping tea and watching the horses graze. "It's not about erasing the past," she mused aloud. "It's about honoring it by building something new together." Agnes clinked her cup against Imogen's. "To new beginnings, and to never giving up." And beneath the ancient trees, with laughter and life echoing across the fields, Hawthorn Grange felt, for the first time in a generation, whole again. Summer drifted into fall, and Hawthorn Grange wore its new life with quiet pride. Leaves turned gold and copper above the paddocks, and laughter rang across the fields on crisp afternoons. The work was never truly finished. There were fences to mend, hay to stack, and paperwork that always seemed to multiply. But there was peace in the routine now, and a kind of grace that settled over the land. Even Sir Julian, once stiff and distant, embraced the change. He took charge of grant applications, welcomed visitors with a smile, and learned the names of every child who came through the gate. When he and Imogen unveiled a new sign at the entrance, Hawthorn Grange Sanctuary, a haven for all, the entire village turned out to celebrate. That evening, as the sun sat over the paddocks and the oaks cast long, golden shadows, Imogen stood with Julian and Agnes sipping tea and watching the horses graze. "It's not about erasing the past," she mused aloud. "It's about honoring it by building something new together." Agnes clinked her cup against Imogen's. "To new beginnings, and to never giving up." And beneath the ancient trees, with laughter and life echoing across the fields, Hawthorn Grange felt, for the first time in a generation, whole again. Summer drifted into fall, and Hawthorn Grange wore its new life with quiet pride. Leaves turned gold and copper above the paddocks, and laughter rang across the fields on crisp afternoons. The work was never truly finished. There were fences to mend, hay to stack, and paperwork that always seemed to multiply. But there was peace in the routine now, and a kind of grace that settled over the land.
Imogen Fairweather often found herself pausing beneath the great oaks, teacup in hand, simply watching. Aspen, sturdy and growing, chased the last of the summer butterflies, while Duchess grazed nearby, her black coat glossy with health. Agnes and a handful of children gathered under the low branches, weaving wreaths from late wildflowers and recounting the story of the night hawthorn burned, each time with a little more magic and a little less sorrow. One Saturday, Imogen set out a long blanket beneath the biggest oak, inviting everyone, volunteers, children, village elders, and even a few newcomers who had drifted in seeking a fresh start. Agnes brought baskets of scones and jam, Julian handled the teapot, and the horses grazed quietly at the edge, always within sight but never in need of restraint. For a moment, Imogen let herself breathe. She felt the hum of belonging that had eluded her for years. When the chatter faded, Imogen found herself speaking, her words unplanned but heartfelt. "You know, there was a time I thought true nobility was something you inherited. Old titles, old money, old scars. But standing here, I see it's earned. It's earned by standing by those the world wants to discard, by choosing to believe in lost causes, and by refusing to walk away when things get hard." She glanced at Duchess and Aspen, and then around the circle. "We all waited in the darkness for dawn, didn't we? Sometimes hope doesn't come with a roar or a rescue. Sometimes it's quiet, it's patience, it's loyalty and the courage to do what's right, no matter the cost." There was a hush as her words settled. Agnes smiled, eyes soft. "We needed to hear that, love, especially the no matter the cost part. I think it's what kept us going." Julian chuckled, raising his cup. To Imogen, the most stubborn woman in Oxfordshire, and to every second chance this place gives. The children cheered, and Aspen butted his nose into Imogen's lap, earning a laugh and a handful of grass. The circle broke into conversations, but Imogen sat quietly for a moment, overwhelmed with gratitude. As the afternoon wore on, stories and memories flowed as freely as the tea. Newcomers shared how they'd found hope at Hawthorn, veterans learning to trust again, children overcoming fear, and once-neglected horses rediscovering their worth. Imogen watched the way everyone pitched in, the way problems were met with creativity and compassion, and she realized Hawthorn Grange was more than land or legacy. It was a living testament to the power of kindness and community. Later, as dusk stretched the shadows, Imogen walked the fence line with Julian. The sanctuary was quiet, the sun dipping behind the oaks. "It's strange," Julian mused. "I used to worry so much about appearances, about what my family would think if they saw the place like this, open to everyone, filled with children and noise and, well, change." Imogen smiled. Change is the only way to honor a legacy. The world moves forward whether we're ready or not. He nodded. "Thank you, Imogen, for teaching me what matters." They stood together, listening to the night birds. In the distance, Agnes's laughter drifted through the barn, and the faint sound of a harmonica, one of the children's latest passions, carried on the breeze. Imogen closed her eyes, letting the peace sink in. Before long, it was time to gather the children and say goodbye. Imogen lingered under the oaks as the last of the guests disappeared down the lane. She knelt beside Duchess, pressing her forehead to the mare's, whispering, "We made it, didn't we? Not just you and me, all of us. This is what home feels like." That night, Imogen wrote a message to the sanctuary supporters, sharing lessons learned, not just about horses or land, but about life. Resilience isn't loud or showy. It's a quiet promise to keep going, to rebuild, to forgive, to try again. Sometimes what's broken can't be restored to what it was, but it can become something better, something stronger. And sometimes, if you're lucky, the ones you save will save you in return. As she sent the message, Imogen thought of all those who were listening. Strangers scrolling on their phones, lonely souls waiting for a sign, children searching for a place to belong. She hoped they would hear the truth behind the story, that compassion, patience, and steadfast kindness really could heal a fractured world, even if only a little at a time. The next morning brought the ordinary magic of Hawthorn Grange, the bray of a donkey, the whistle of Agnes corralling volunteers, Aspen's gallop across the field. Imogen smiled, ready for the next challenge, secure in the knowledge that she was never alone, not anymore. And so, beneath the oaks, surrounded by laughter, hard work, and 1,000 small acts of love, Hawthorn Grange stood, renewed, resilient, and filled with hope for whatever dawn would bring next. If you've been moved by this story of quiet courage and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true tales of resilience. Let's keep building a kinder world together, one story at a time.